Hi, my name's Jason Harden. I'm a dungeon master for D&D. I've been dungeon mastering and role playing for about 10 years, 15 years now. Over the last year, I've been using Dungeon Painter Studio to create virtual assets for my games that I'm running in Fantasy Grounds. I wanted to create a little video on how I create towns within Dungeon Painter Studio. The first way I start is with the rectangular tool, and I select a ground type using the Dragonville. Usually I use realistic, sometimes I'll use the hand painted grounds. I just create an area that I'm going to work with. Usually I create it larger than I might think my town is. Generally, I also start out with a reference of how big I think my grid is going to be. So whether a square is in reference to 5 feet by 5 feet, or it's 20 feet by 20 feet, or maybe I'm doing one that's 100 feet by 100 feet. Once I have that reference, that helps me determine the scale of the buildings that I'm placing. There are two options I use to create buildings. The first is to use the grounds and floors tool to draw out polygons and use the Dragonville hand painted roofs to then design the building. You need to make sure that you remember there are 4 different tile types for each set or roof type, and that's going to give you various shades based on the direction of the tile. So this one would be the A180 is pointing down. So then what I do is I draw it using the polygon tool, and I switch up based on whichever roof line I'm dealing with. The tiles as well, so that I am always matching the shading to the correct direction. This is the final, so I always create 4 pieces. And then what I will do is I will group these 4 pieces together. And then I'll go into them, and in order to add the effect that I like with the shading, I will create a new preset. I'll call it shadow. And what I will do is I will add a tint for black at about a 50% intensity, and then I'll apply it to just the 2 sides that I want to be shaded. So if I want this side, I will apply, and then if I want that side, I will apply again. So now I have a rough building with some shading. If I wanted to, I would also go in to each of these, and I would scale down the tile size based on my mental frame of reference for how big each of the tiles is. So that these don't look out of proportion, so that I don't have these huge roof tiles when I might have a 100 by 100 foot grid kind of thing. The other thing that I oftentimes will do is I will also go into effects and I will add another tint. So say red, and that helps to create distinctive tile colors for your building. So now all of a sudden the buildings on this tile are red instead of brown, and I keep all of the shading from the texture, but I apply a different color, and then I can scale back the intensity to create different tones, so that way you can make a really colorful town as well. The second way to create towns, which is probably a lot quicker, is to use one of the modules that's called Modular Roofs, and that's by a group called Forgotten Adventures. They have a Patreon page, which I'll list in the description, and they produce these really pretty object tiles that you can use. So in this sense, it's really easy because you just pick your extension. So if I want a really long but wide building, I can use this one, and I just paste it in. If I need to rotate it, I can rotate it here. So if I want it going at 90-degree angle, I can go like this here. Sometimes it's a little wonky with the grid. So sometimes I will turn off stick to grid for these. And then they also have turns. So if you want to match it, you got to match up the shading you want for your turn as well as the size you picked. And then you can stick that in as well. I think I got the wrong size. Here we go. This is the right size. So then you just fit it in where you want, and now all of a sudden I've got a long L-shaped building. The other really nice thing is they have towers. So if I wanted a circular tower or if I want a hexagonal tower, those are really easy to just paste in. I have the same benefit with tinting. So I can apply a red tint here, and I can go deep red if I wanted, or I could apply an orange tint, and now I've got more colorful buildings. So that's really nice. They also have thatched roofs, which is another style. The one drawback I would say with this is, as of yet, there aren't a whole heck of a lot. There's only two styles really. There's thatch roofs, and then there's this roof tile. Whereas with Dragonville, you get a few more options within the tiling. You've got looks like you got five different options, and they're pretty unique. So if you're looking for more of a tiled roof compared to like a stucco or a shingled roof, you might want to go with that idea, or a wood shingled roof. So that's kind of the benefit there. Again, it's a lot quicker to place buildings down using the object method as well. So from here, now that I've got some buildings down, I start creating roads. And this again goes back to using the ground and floor tiles. I go with again the realistic, and so you've got a couple of options here. You can do stone A, stone B, stone C. Those are kind of like cobblestone roads. D is a little bit more refined, and then you've got different brush sizes that allow for easy painting. So if you want a really thick road, you can use the really big one. If you want more of a brushed out look, so some of the grass comes through, you can do it with this brush. If you want a solid, just everything comes, it's all brick, you can go with another one of these brushes. But basically you pick the brush size you want to use, and you go from there, and you draw where you want the road to be. So these are going to be more organic roads because there's not that straight line. So for more of a village, these are great. If you want something that is much more squared off, more like a road that you would see in a well-planned city, then I go back to my rectangle tool and I use that. Or I go with the polygon tool in order to get certain angles that you want to use for the building. So that's kind of how I do that. And then lastly, you've got trees that you may want to place, or other objects. So with the Dragonville set, you've got a certain set of trees, and you can just place those around, and you can scale. A good tool here is the scaling tool, and I like to lock the scale when I put a tree down, because then if I switch between trees, the size stays the same between all of them. So that's a really useful tool. I also will flip to Fantasy Valley sometimes if I want bushes to be in the area, or some of the neat flower plants that they have. Or I will go to, if I really want a lot of different stuff, I will go to the Complete Fantasy module, which just has all sorts of things. Now the big thing here is I don't really know the licensing for these images, so if it's Creative Commons, or if somebody just happened to go grab a bunch of images and said, hey, I'm going to put it into a pack and submit it on Steam. It's also a lot bigger, which means it's a lot harder to find. So that's kind of a bummer. But they have things like statues. So if you wanted to put a statue in the middle of your town, you can do stuff like that. If you want to make pools, I like to use the circle to do that. So what I will do is usually I'll pick one of the tiled looking ones, and I'll put a circle down, and then within that circle I'll go back to the grounds. I will find some water, and within here I will put another circle. So I basically have like a fountain kind of thing sitting in the middle of the square or something along those lines. So this is not a pretty town, but this is kind of gives you the basic concepts of what I do to create towns.